Assalamu alaikum viewers. History is neither for excuse nor for revenge. Historical mistakes cannot be undone and they have a cascading effect on the nation's future. The legacy of our journey with United Pakistan is littered with such many instances, of which the military operation carried out on Australia's Pakistan is just one such event. This is General Sarwar and you are watching Sarwar's Chronicle. If we recall history, it was on the night of 25th March 1971 when Pakistani military contingents rolled out into the streets of Dhaka towards south. As they proceeded, they were faced with a lot of picketers and protesters, and the military opened fire indiscriminately, killing many on that occasion. The silence was finally shattered when all the guns began to rattle. They have killed the unarmed, peace-loving students of Jagannath Hall, Rokia Hall, Arjun Hall, and in many other venues of Dhaka University. They have killed the armed police members in Rajawar police line, then EPR members in Pilkhana, Hindus in the downtown Dhaka, and they also arrested a number of political leaders, including Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman. The Pakistanis thought the uprising would be over in a few months' time, but that did not. People rose to the occasion. Led by a handful of military officers, they fought against the Pakistanis. Now, if you ask me what really emboldened them, motivated them, inspired them, the answer would be nothing but the spirit of our nationalism. What else could have been more befitting subject to speak on in this month of independence other than nationalism? So here I am to speak on nationalism. We often hear about the term in news, bulletins, debates, in public speakings, but in essence, its significance is less understood. So let me cite an example. Let's say we are all watching IPL matches, and I'm sure you must have noticed that Bangladeshis en masse they support Kolkata Knight Riders and Rajasthan Royals. Is it because Kolkata is geographically dearer to us, or they do speak in the same language that we do? Or Rajasthan has a lot of palaces and beautiful deserts? Or we just like them because of their performance? Just think for a while. I'm sure none of these will inspire you to like those teams until and unless they are represented by Saqib Al-Hasan or Mustafizur Rahman. But why do these people matter to you? I'm sure none of you have met them, neither you belong to his hometown, or neither you are a member of the cricketing fraternity. Why do you care whether these players win a match being played thousands of miles away? Your answer to this question probably indicates your association with arguably the most powerful ideology of nationalism. Nationalism is an idea that makes it possible for millions of people to feel for each other without even knowing. For example, I am one of 170 million Bangladeshis. I don't know, probably intimately even 170 people. But still, if one Bangladeshi dies on the streets of Middle East due to road accident, my heart will bleed as much as yours. That's how nationalism makes it possible for a lot of strangers or millions of strangers to care for each other. Nationalism is an idea that speaks that human being organized as ethnic group should have the right to rule themselves. They also feel that is the only way to protect their interests is to have their own nation states. It was such a prominent force in the early 20th century Europe, and eventually it turned out to be the most significant causes of First World War. Truly speaking, it's very hard to even imagine our identity without the format of nation and nationalism. It must be clear that when the human being first time came to the world, the concept of nation or nationalism did not exist. In fact, they have emerged much later in history to dominate the human psyche, quite manifestly in 18th century. Their emergence has been so significant that today entire globe is territorially divided on the basis of nation and nation states. So it must be interesting to learn as to why and how they have evolved. Consider you want to visit to London and you thought of buying something for your near ones. So you took a cheap railway ride to the nearby mall. As you are planning to buy some ready-made garments, all of a sudden you noticed there is a tagline, "Made in Bangladesh," written over it. Just imagine how many people were involved from Bangladesh to London in terms of buying house, then cutter, sewing machine operator, then your shipping personals, making sure that the product reaches from Bangladesh to London or up to that mall. So every aspect of our life, starting from toothpaste to Mercedes-Benz car, is utterly dependent on thousands of such or millions of such small little cooperative actions involving millions of people from many countries. Vast majority of whom we don't know, we did not know they existed. This level of cooperation and precision did not come overnight, and it followed a very lengthy evolutionary trail. To understand the concept of nationalism, we shall go back to history to review the human life starting from cave dwellers era to the start of modernity in Europe. We all know that our ancestors, they used to live in the caves in a group of 20 to 30 odd people. While doing so, they used to coordinate among themselves during hunting, while gathering food, while doing the child rearing, and also while fighting with various groups. To some extent, genetic legacy can be credited for all this, but for doing larger scale projects, great projects, you need larger scale human cooperation. When people created fire, caught turtles, tilled the soil, gathered honey and did all this, they were following some sort of norms. And from time to time, these norms were passed down from the kin members to the distant places. This system had worked very fine when the teachers and the learners were closely knit, like fathers teaching the kids and siblings teaching each other. Yet, without some rudimentary form of language, it would be difficult to teach the faraway people. Otherwise, it would have been a barren exercise. So came the language that also came before 6,000 years ago. And almost around the same time, the human being, they started the agriculture, and the farm animals that we see today had been domesticated. Let's fast forward to medieval age European society, which was based on feudal system, a system which was borrowed from Roman Empire and was in vogue in Europe from 300 to 1400 years. It's a system in which the kings, after conquering a particular territory, he used to divide it to the nobles. And nobles, they were a social class immediately below the king, who used to be king's sisters, brothers, in-laws, or near or dear ones. These nobles, in turn, they used to rent out these lands to the peasants, and the peasants, in exchange, used to provide the nobles with produce and military service. And the relation almost existed the same between the kings and the nobles as well. This is how the feudal economy functioned. As feudalism ended, it gave rise to two most powerful concepts of capitalism and nationalism that had shaped the entire world that we live in today. In the feudal system, the villages were self-sufficient. In fact, they only produced things for themselves, not for the markets, and they did not have the concept of savings. The king, including his progenies, they preferred the feudal system just because under this system, the king, they did not have to pay for and maintain large armies. So the kings, including his successors, they were, alongside this, they were abusing power, misusing money, funds and all that. But it was King John who came up with the Magna Carta Charter in June 1215. That really spelled out that the king or the monarch is not beyond law, and he also introduced some 64 clauses which specifying the individual rights of the people. That really was the start of a huge era for the humanity. In the feudal system, the villages were self-sufficient. In fact, they only produced things for themselves, not for the markets, and they did not have the concept of savings or profit or anything of that sort. So under the feudal system, people did not have much aspirations, they were not ambitious, but things gradually changed, and the feudal people, they have started producing not only for themselves but also for market. So in those days, trading used to take place based on barter system of trading, it's called, without using money, meaning to say that you have banana, I have rice. If we need each other's commodities, we could come on to a mutual terms and we change that. So there was no monetary transaction really, but still it served the purpose. And this sort of activities used to take place between people that you understood their language, because after all, without language you can't bargain. So that is how capitalism started to take shape, by having the means of production or the land under the control of someone other than the state. People were not nomads, they were fixed because they used to get into the agriculture, so they started saving money. So that is how a group of people having the same culture, same religion, same habits, customs, cuisines and everything combined basically gave rise to the first concept of nation. About the same time, in 14th century in Europe, there was a huge population decline due to Black Death and famine. Particularly between first to third quarter of 14th century, the European population became almost half, and Europe underwent huge economic stagnation. And to compensate for this, the monarchs and the nobles, they had undertaken some very drastic measures, particularly squeezing the life standard of the peasants, and thereby they had to increase rents, and that had a very negative impact on the life of the peasants. The peasants, they failed to make much surplus which was necessary to increase the fertility of the land. As a result, the productivity went down, so there was a huge class struggle. That is how nationalism began to bloom in England. Throughout 14th and 15th century, British and French found themselves in bitter conflict over the dispute of English territorial claim over French territory, and also a legitimate claim of French throne. This is also called the 100 Years' War, that started intermittently between France and England, started from 1337 to 1443 for almost 160 years. Such a long conflict between these two nations, particularly France and England, gave rise to huge sense of nationalism and militancy. Not only that, following this prolonged war, a few iconic figures came up, like the Henry V in England and Joan of Arc in France. Due to war, England became bankrupt and France became victorious, taking much of the control of French territory except Calais, which is a port area, and ferry site on the northern France adjacent to Belgium. In England, many nobles became extremely rich because power enhanced at the lower level, but at the level of the king and monarchs, they became correspondingly weaker. And that's why whenever the king or the monarch, they decided to go to war against France or any countries, they had to depend on the parliament, and every time parliament had to call for taxing the people. So that was the kind of dynamics that turned out to be after the revolution. Even the economic situation of many communities worsened by tax, particularly if we could mention the reign of Edward III, who during his 50 years reign from 1327 to 1377, he called for tax 23 times. So that was the kind of situation was going on in England. So if we look at the dynamics of or the growth of nationalism in England, it was bottom up as contrary to France, which was top-down approach. Now let us see how does this subject connects to our region. So if you look at the British rule in our region, the most significant development is, to my understanding, is the growth of middle class in India, particularly with the introduction of English language, establishment of financial institutions, insurance companies, commercial enterprises, business enterprises, then shipping lines, and many other service sectors. So basically, these have generated a huge number of middle class in the particularly center in Calcutta, since it was the hub of the English people. Apart from this, the introduction of the Western concept of proprietorship, which was instituted in this region through Jamindari system, that also gave rise to another landed class. So altogether, they made a huge number of middle class people when the British were still settling in India. The value of middle class have long been perceived as a source of cohesion, social growth, because of the reason that they are vibrant, they are aware, they are energetic, they are confident, thriving, engaging. and they're game changer. So the Calcutta-based middle class really played that crucial role during the partition of Bengal in 1905. They waged the Swadeshi movement, they waged the boycott movement, and ultimately these movements have acted as the precursor to the pan-Indian anti-British movement led by Mahatma Gandhi that followed. If nationalism is the binding force behind all great things, its misuse and abuse, as had been demonstrated by Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini during the middle of the last century, can exponentially bring disaster for any nation. So it's better that we only focus on the bright side of the nationalism and we avoid its use and misuse to refrain from fascism and genocide. With this, I welcome you to watch my next video on the growth of nationalism during French Revolution, including its impact. So I request you to subscribe my channel if you have not done it yet. Until then, goodbye and Allah Hafiz.